You got grit. You got grit, and fish of Eden. You got grit. True grit is making a decision and standing by it, doing what must be done. No moral man can have peace of mind if he leaves undone what he knows he should have done. That's a quote by John Wayne. You got grit. So here's Ann Fish of Eden, a community volunteer and a weekly newspaper columnist with the Greensboro News and Record. What was it like growing up in Reidsville?
Maybe I grew up in that time when there was no TV, no electronics, no phones. Our phone was attached. You didn't walk away from the phone. You stayed right where it was. As children, we played outside. We went outside and we played all afternoon or all day. Didn't worry about anybody grabbing us or taking off with us. And we were a neighborhood group. We played, we roller skated, we rode our bikes. We had a lot of fun just doing things, playing dodgeball and hide and seek. Children nowadays don't know those things. They don't enjoy being out and being together. And we developed childhood friends back then that have remained throughout our lives. I went to school with different people that from the time we were in first grade together, we were there till 12th grade. We still have those relationships. We still meet once a month with my class that I graduated with in 1957. We meet once a month for lunch or dinner, and we all know each other. And it's not like growing up today. The children don't even know each other's names half the time anymore, and they communicate by phone or some other electronic device, so they don't have the joy of being with others.
What are some of your favorite childhood memories here in Rockingham County?
Well, it used to be a big thing for me because we were poor and we didn't have a lot of money. So every Monday night we walked to Rockingham Theater and watched whatever movie. You didn't have to worry about R-rated movies and X-rated movies. So we'd walk to Rockingham Theater on Monday nights. And I know Miss Betsy Penn used to come every night, Monday night, and her chauffeur would come out and park out front and go buy her ticket, and he'd come take her inside. She always sat in the same place. And so then he would come back after the movie and take her home. Well, we walked to the movie, and I think until Mr. Bill Hendricks was the owner of the theater. And, you know, I was real small when I was little. And I think I paid 10 cents to get in the movies till I was about 17 or 18 years old, because he never told me I didn't have to pay that. But I mean, we went to the movies, we did family things together every Sunday afternoon. My grandma would start cooking on Wednesday or Thursday, and she made all these good cakes and pies and desserts, and she sat them on the table in the dining room, and we could not touch them. And then on Sunday after church, all of her children would come and bring their children, and we'd sit out on the porch in the summertime and we'd talk about family things, about what was going on. The men got a quilt and sat out under the pecan trees and talked about their war stories, because I had 4 or 5 uncles that were in World War II, and they all came home. And so it was a family situation. It was not children doing their own thing. The families were together. And my Uncle Claude Summers, he would come every Sunday and he'd say, "Hello, everybody," and I'd lean over and kiss Mama Summers, my grandma, on the cheek. Then he'd walk right straight through to the dining room, and next thing you know, he'd be coming out the front door with a chicken leg. And so, I mean, it was just that type of relationship and that type family situation. And all the neighbors knew each other, and my next door neighbors were Nellie and Roy Stallings. For years, I didn't know that they weren't really my Aunt Nellie and Uncle Roy. I didn't know they weren't related to me. And so, you know, it was more centered on people and our families and our neighbors back then.
How did you become a writer?
A writer or a reporter? Okay, no, seriously. When I was 14 years old, the day I was 14, I went to work for J.J. Newberry which is like a 5 and dime store downtown on Scale Street. I worked for them until December 30th of 1956, and they closed then. Well, I wanted to get a part-time job, and I went to Reedsville Review and put in an ad in the classified ads for a part-time typist, but it never got in the paper because Mr. Charlie Oliver, the owner, called me and asked me if I would be interested in coming in and working for them as a typist to catch up some work that they had to catch up. Now, to go back a little bit, I started typing when I was in 9th grade. Helen Gillum was my typing teacher, and she always said, "Don't worry about speed, worry about accuracy." And so that's what my motto was, that I worked and I worked, and I was really accurate on typing. So while I was in high school, they started having me type the teacher's test and the reports and everything that teachers had to do. So I had learned, I really honed my typing skills, so to speak. So then Mr. Oliver called and asked me to go to work for them. And I was typing. It was one of the old Remington typewriters that you type like this and threw that back the carriage. It wasn't electric in any shape or form. But I got all my work done and a whole lot less time than I thought I would. And I had been slipping and writing little news articles up because people would bring in and leave them there at the desk, and I'd pick them up. It'd be the garden club was meeting at such and such, and they had such and such desserts and everything like that. Well, I started typing those things up, and then I'd slip them into the basket for the typesetters in the back. I didn't have sense enough to know that they could figure out which typewriter I was typing on, but they were watching me, and I didn't know it, but I was sneaking and writing these articles. And so one day Mr. Oliver called me in and said that the society editor was leaving and that they were going to promote the assistant society editor to that position, and would I like to go upstairs and be working in the news department. I said, "I don't know how to write news," and he laughed. He said, "Oh, yes, you do." And he pulled out some of those things that I had typed and showed them to me. So I went upstairs, was in the building, the review office was in a building right behind what is now the Reedsville Library. It was a big 2-story building. So I went upstairs and was working in the society department. And then the lady, her name was Gail Powell, she left to get married or have a baby or something, and then they made me the society editor right before I was 18 years old. I was the youngest daily news society editor in the United States, and the Associated Press made a big deal out of that and wrote stories about it and everything like that. But anyway, I got to talking to the sheriff's department and police department were right behind the office, and I would run into them, and they started talking to me about reporting crime. So technically I started writing crime stories because they'd come say, "Well, we're going to do so-and-so and so-and-so." So I wrote up the crime stories. So Sheriff Carl Axum and his deputies actually got me started in the crime division. So that's how it all started.
Oh my goodness. How did you get involved with racing and NASCAR?
Well, I guess I was kind of born into it because I had 2 uncles that were really involved in racing, and they actually went to the first race that they ever had at Martinsville Speedway back in 1949, and they talked about, they sat up on a bank and all these cars go around in circles, and it was really red mud and dust up there, and when they got ready to leave, all they did, their faces were completely covered with mud and red mud, and all you could see was their eyes and their teeth. And my Uncle Shug Summers, who ran a radiator shop in Reedsville from the time he returned home from war until he retired back in the 90s, he was building radiators, and the Wood brothers up in Stewart, Virginia, Glenn Wood, one of the famed Wood brother racers, his wife, Bernice, was one of the Markles from the Markle family. And so she knew about Uncle Shug, they knew about Uncle Shug, and every Monday morning Bernice would drive down to Reedsville in her Edsel. That was a car that they had at the time, and they drove forward. So and she would had a trunk of that Edsel filled with radiators, and she'd leave them with Uncle Shug, and then Glenn and Leonard Wood, the brothers that were racing, they worked at a sawmill in Yanceyville. So they would come to Reedsville on Friday afternoon and pick up the radiators and take them, put them in their cars. And they didn't have cars like we have today. They'd have street cars and they'd work on them. So they would pick them up and take them back and race them, blow them up all weekend or what have you. And then the thing repeated next week. Bernice would come down there and drop them off. And then the boys would pick them up and go. Then when I returned to, I used to go and watch Lee Petty and David Pearson and all those race over in Winston-Salem at the racetrack over there. But when I left here and was gone for a while, and I came back in the 80s and started working for the Eden News, I requested press passes to the races, and so I would go to the races and meet the drivers and talk to them, and it just all started from there.
What about your experiences in other cities, and why did you return to Rockingham County?
Well, I moved after I got married and I had my children. My husband was from Arizona, and we went out in the early 70s on vacation, and my father-in-law lived in a place called Sierra Vista, Arizona. And I liked it there, and I said to my husband, let's just stay here. And so we ended up calling back home and told the people at the house we owned in Eden, pack up the house and put it in storage, we're going to stay here. And so I worked there in Arizona until 1979. My mother had a brain tumor, and I came home in July of 79 to look after her in her final days. And she passed away in September, and I wanted to go back to Arizona because I'd gotten involved in the film business out there. But my children wanted to stay here because Anna, my daughter, she was in school with children that she had started kindergarten with, so she wanted to finish at Moorhead. So I finally agreed that yes, we'll stay until y'all both graduate. But now she's in New Mexico and I'm stuck in Rockingham County. So.
Rockingham County Commissioners honored you as an Outstanding Volunteer of the Month. You're a Rockingham County Citizens Academy grad, a Betsy Jeff Penn 4-H board member, a Veterans Affairs supporter. So how do you carve out time to also serve as a genealogy volunteer?
I think that a lot of people nowadays, especially older people, have a tendency to sit down and watch TV all day long. And they don't go anywhere or do anything. So I consider time one of the most valuable assets that you can have. So I try to, rather than watch TV, I take most of everything I watch, and then I can just scan through it real fast, and I might can watch, like if it's a Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy, like Wheel of Fortune, as soon as I know the answer, I switch on to the next question, and so I can scan through maybe 2 hours of TV in an hour or a little bit more. So I save a lot of time just by recording a lot of things, and I don't watch a lot of TV. I don't watch soap operas, or I don't like to get involved with watching a series or anything, because that requires you to be there every week or be tied down to it. So I don't do any television. I do watch television, but I schedule my times around it.
Why did you come up with an idea for a Rockingham County-wide food drive?
Well, I belong to Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and back about 11 or 12 years ago, they wanted our community, our members, to get more involved in the community, so they started asking us to do community programs. And we went to a meeting in Greensboro. Blake Dawson and I went to a meeting in Greensboro where our stake center is, and they said, we want you to find something that will put you out and get you involved in the community so that the people in the community will know who we are, because there's so many misconceptions about my church. Mm-hmm. And so this was what the whole idea was, to get members involved that with the townspeople and the citizens, so that they would know what we were, who we were. So on the way back, I told Blake I had recently written an article about hunger in Rockingham County. And I said, famous last words, let's do a county-wide food drive, because it's just going to be one day, one time, 1 year, And so we got together and we contacted 8 different agencies and asked them if they would like to be involved. And we told them we were going to do the food drive in April for a month, and we'd go out and involve businesses and organizations and collect food for a month, and then we would divide it between those 8 agencies. And so that was 10 years ago, and we just finished up our 10th year, although just as we started this year, of course, COVID hit, and we had some people that were already collecting food, but usually we collected, in the last few years, first year we had 6 agencies, I think, and a $10,000 goal. In the last few years, our goal has been 50,000 pounds of food, and it has 7 agencies benefiting. This year, with COVID, we just figured out that the church gave us 22,000 pounds of food this year. Our church has a welfare program, and they have been contributing a large amount of food each year to the food drive, but this year they gave us 22,000 pounds. And then other people like Wills McLean, they donated $1,000. Wentworth Town, the vote gave us $5,000, and a lot of the businesses got their food drives started, and they continued them. And Duke Power, Pine Hall Brick, Blow Molded, and City of Eden all brought us tons of food as far as we were concerned, not being able to do any work on it. And we ended up with nearly 40,000 pounds of food this year, even though we weren't actively working it like we usually did.
You're retired. You just celebrated your 81st birthday. You're a grandmother, a mother. You have creative culinary skills, but you're still tied to that police scanner. Why?
Well, you know, it's an old saying, old habits are hard to break. And let's face it, I've been doing news business, crime news, for the better part of 60 years. I think it's about 64 years now. And so, you know, I lived with that scanner. And so I keep the scanner on, and then I inform, like, WXII, Channel 12, and some of the other TV reporters. I let them know what's going on in the county. And not only that, but, you know, to be a good newspaper reporter, you've got to have one certain attribute. I'm nosy. I'm probably one of the nosiest people you will ever see. And so I got to know everything about everybody, and there used to be a saying among the sheriff's office that I could get more information out of somebody talking to them in 10 minutes than they could in several hours. So you sit down with me and I'm going to ask you where you came from, who your parents are. You know, it's just natural, and I sometimes annoy people asking so many nosy questions, but you know, when you're nosy, you don't care.
You're always connecting folks to help folks. And I've heard if you can find someone to do what needs to be done in helping someone, you'll handle it yourself. Where did this good Samaritan characteristic originate? I
don't think it originated. I think you kind of born with my family. Even though we were poor, we helped other people. I had 2 uncles that had gardens. Well, actually, one of them was a cousin. My uncle Shug had a garden after he retired. He had a huge garden, and he would take the vegetables out of it and share it. He'd take them downtown and take it to people working in stores. My cousin Dickie Delap did the same thing. He had a garden, and he would go and share the food with everybody else. It's just something that was kind of inbred in our family, I think, to help others. And also, with the church, we help each other in my church, and we are assigned, for instance, in the latest Relief Society, we are assigned 2 or 3 other women that we check on each month to make sure they're okay and what they need. We regularly practice a series of moral principles. Be nice to one another, do good, go and change the world. Jesus Christ was a good Samaritan. What better example for me to follow than Jesus Christ?
You Got Grit, Ann Fish of Eden, North Carolina. Bet you know a Rockingham County citizen who you describe by saying, "You got grit." So email us a paragraph describing a Rockingham County citizen you think Spectrum 1304 should interview for You Got Grit. You Got Grit? Simply email your paragraph to us at mscott@co.rockingham.nc.us. Be sure to email your paragraph, your suggestion of someone you'd like for us to interview on You Got Grit to mscott@co.rockingham.nc.us. Thanks from You Got Grit.